Good evening, everyone. Shawaike Shagotom. I'll say a few words about Sir V.S. Naipaul, not that he needs any introduction. And I'll also say a few words in Bangla because a lot of the audience here are not that conversant in English. It's a huge privilege, obviously, for us to have Sir Vidia with us this evening. And I just wanted to take you back to sort of where he came from, what is he about, because he's much more than just a Nobel Prize winner. So essentially, I'll tell you a little bit about him. Not that you need to know, but I think a few things needs to be put in context. I was looking at the press. I'll say all of this in Bangla in a minute. Press reporting today, and the emphasis was the Nobel Prize winner in literature has come to Bangladesh. But like I said, he's more than just a Nobel Prize winner. He came from Trinidad. He looks like an Indian. So what is the story behind that? He's now British. I'll tell you a little bit about that as well. So his grandfather moved to Trinidad as a sugar plantation worker, and his father, Sir V.S. Naipaul, even though he was part of a largely peasant community, he chose to be a journalist in English, and he wrote for the Trinidad Guardian. And he viewed writing as a noble profession. V.S. Naipaul grew up in that community in Trinidad. And at 18, he won a scholarship to Oxford, and his life in England began from there. V.S. Naipauler দাদা দাদিরা ছিলেন ইন্ডিয়ান বংশোদ্ভূত। তারা চিনি প্লান্টেশন যেটা সেখানে কাজ করার জন্য ত্রিনিদাদে যান। ওখান থেকে V.S. নাইপল বড় হয়ে 18 বছর বয়সে স্কলারশিপ পেয়ে উনি অক্সফোর্ড বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়ে পড়তে যান ইংল্যান্ডে। After leaving Oxford, he got a degree in English. You would think someone of his talent, and with a degree in Oxford back in those days, life would be easy, as in getting a job or flourishing in writing, but it wasn't. It was very difficult for him. And he started writing straight from the day he graduated. Actually, he's been writing all along. He knew he wanted to be a writer. It was very firm in his mind. But it was very difficult. It was very difficult conditions that he had to work under. And he worked in BBC for a brief period of time and would write his novels in the evenings. We will talk about that while we talk to Sir Vidia. তো উনি অক্সফোর্ড বিশ্ববিদ্যালয় থেকে পাশ করার পরে উনি চাকরি শুরু করেন বিবিসিতে, ছোট একটা কাজ পান ক্যারিবিয়ান ভয়েসেস নামে একটি প্রোগ্রামে, কারণ ওনার ফাইন্যান্সিয়ালি ওনার অবস্থা খুব খারাপ ছিল তখন। তো ইয়াং মানুষ, লন্ডন শহরে, ঠান্ডার দেশ, উনি আসছে ত্রিনিদাদ থেকে, রাইটার হতে চান, ফুল টাইম কাজ চান না, বই লিখতে চান। আমরাও যারা রাইটার এখন আমাদের এরকম অনেক ডিলেমা হয়, কতখানি সময় দিব লেখায়, কতখানি সময় দেবো কাজে। তো ওনারও ওইসব সমস্যা ছিল আরও বেশি প্রকট আকারে, কারণ ওনার কোনো ফ্যামিলি ছিল না ওখানে। তো তারপরে উনি লেখা শুরু করেন। So by the time he was 30, so this is very important, by the time he's 30, he's written 4 novels, one of which is A House for Mr Biswas. And a lot of you will know it's one of the greatest novels of the 20th century. And he had become a fellow of the Royal Society of Literature at the age of 29. I just want you to just sort of think about that for a moment. So ওনার বয়স 30 হতে হতে উনি 4টা বই লিখে ফেলেছেন। তার মধ্যে একটা গত 100 বছরের অন্যতম সেরা বই, যেটার নাম A House for Mr Biswas. তো তারপরেও স্ট্রাগল যে চলে গেছে তা না, হি হ্যাড টু স্ট্রাগল করতে করতে ওনার নাম কিন্তু নোবেলের যে রানিং, যে নোবেলের যে লিস্ট থাকে যে নোবেল প্রাইজ পাবেন, এটা 1973 সাল থেকে চলছে। সো সিন্স 1973 he's been in the running for the Nobel Prize. He won the Nobel Prize in 2001. So that's why I want to say that he's much more than a Nobel Prize winner. He's an inspiration. He worked tirelessly to be a writer. He didn't do any other profession. He didn't pursue anything else. He didn't pursue any fame, any vanity. He wasn't very interested in festivals. He wasn't interested in public speaking. He just concentrated on his books. So we will take it from here. মানে আমি যা এতক্ষণ বললাম এখান থেকে বাকি যে কথা এখন আমরা ওনার সাথে বলবো, উনি স্টেজে আসবেন। আমি আপনাদেরকে একটু অনুরোধ করতে চাই, ওনার বয়স 84, অনেক দূর থেকে অনেক কষ্ট করে এসেছেন। আপনারা যদি ধৈর্য সহকারে শুনেন ওনার কথাগুলা, উনি খুব আস্তে কথা বলেন, একটু সময় নিয়ে উত্তর দিবেন, তো আমি খুব খুশি হব, উনিও খুশি হবেন। উনি খুবই আনন্দিত ঢাকায় আসতে পেরে। এখন একটু বলি ওনার সাথে পরিচয় কীভাবে, এটা একটু ইংরেজিতে বলি তারপরে বাংলায় বলবো। Literary editor, one of the leading literary editors in Bangladesh, Khadimul Islam, he put me in touch with a writer called Farooq Dhondi in London. So I knew Farooq was in touch with V.S. Naipaul. So I kind of lashed onto him and said, no, you have to take me to V.S. Naipaul. It took me a year just to get to the house because Farooq was just trying not to place me in the house. But I was determined because in my mind I had to bring it to Dhaka. So after a year of trying and chasing Farooq, I finally got to their house and I said, I met you both about 10 years ago accidentally on a train in London going from Tottenham Court Road to Charing Cross. You were in the same carriage as me and we had a small chat and you invited me to your house for tea, but by the time the doors closed, I realized, and you had left, you didn't give me your phone number or your email address. So that was quite poetic for me. I just felt, the sliding doors moment, the doors were closing and they said, Lady Naipaul said, you must come for tea at Wilshire. I said, yes, I would love to, and the doors just closed. So I thought my chance had vanished. And it's very difficult, by the way, to get through to writers of this caliber, this stature, because the agents are very protective. And for a Bangladeshi like me who looks dodgy anyway, it's incredibly impossible. So এটা একটু বাংলায় বলছি যে আমার সাথে মধ্যে পরিচয় ফারুক ধন্দির মাধ্যমে, যিনি আমার বন্ধু হয়েছেন খাদেমুল ইসলামের পরিচয় সূত্রে। তো ফারুক ধন্দিকে অনেক ধরে আমি ওনাদের বাসায় গেলাম। বাসায় যাওয়ার পরে আমি বললাম যে আপনাদের সাথে আমার 10 বছর আগে দেখা হয়েছিল, আপনাদের হয়তো মনে নেই, আমি ঢাকার একটা ছেলে, আমার খুব ইচ্ছা আপনাদেরকে বাংলাদেশে নেয়ার, এবং ট্রেনে আপনি বলেছিলেন যে বাসায় এসো চা খেতে, কিন্তু ইমেল অ্যাড্রেসও দেননি, ফোন নাম্বারও দেননি, আমি আর যোগাযোগ করতে পারি নাই। তো এখন আমি এসে গেছি, এখন ঢাকায় যাবেন কবে বলেন, আমি না শুনবো না। তো এর মধ্যে আমার যে দুই কো ডিরেক্টর সাদাফ সাজ আর কে আনিস আহমেদ, এরা খুব আমাকে সাপোর্ট করেছে যে হ্যাঁ তুমি করো, আমরা আছি। তো বলে নাই যে একলা চলো রে, বলে যে আমরা আছি তোমার সাথে, চালাও। সো ওখানের সূত্র ধরেই আজকে এই যে প্রায় 1.5 বছরের কাজ এটা, মানে we've been working on it for almost 18 months to get him to Dhaka, and thank you. And it's been taking V.S. Naipaul from London to Dhaka has been the equivalent of organizing a festival itself. But that's all right, because he himself is a festival. I mean, he's as big as anyone. So we're absolutely delighted, absolutely thrilled. And at a time when Bangladesh is facing so much criticism and so much exposure to threats, and when I've had writers canceling, saying I can't come to Bangladesh because I'm too scared, V.S. Naipaul said, no, I'm never scared. He went to East Africa at a time when it was very difficult and very dangerous. So he, as a writer, he's never been scared. And I think personally, I think that's very fundamental to being a writer. You cannot be scared. You have to be brave. You have to go where no one else wants to go. So that is a true inspiration for us. So without further ado, because I'm sure you want to see him, not me, and not me to talk for hours, I would like to welcome, with a warm round of applause, Sir Vidia Naipaul and Lady Naipaul.
Standing ovation.
Thank you. And before I start, I must add, without Lady Naipaul's support and encouragement, this wouldn't have been possible today. So can I have another round of applause just for Lady Naipaul? Sir Vidia, good evening.
Good evening. But I took some time to get here, drove through slowly, the traffic. But apart from that, it was all right. It was all right.
Well, we're very grateful that you're here. We're very grateful that you're supporting Dhaka Literary Festival. And I would like to sort of have this is just a friendly conversation in your living room, like I sometimes have in your home in South Kensington. So, and all of these people here are friends. So they're here to hear our conversation, which is normally in private.
Nice.
But for this occasion, it'll be public.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
So, we were discussing last time I saw you in London. I mean, I've been spending some time with you in Dhaka, but in London I was asking you about how it all began, how it all started, right from the start. So you came to England at the age of 18. You won a scholarship to Oxford. But you knew very firmly in your head that you wanted to be a writer.
Yes.
It was very clear. And it was astonishing that you didn't want to pursue any other profession. And if I may read out a little 2 lines that I found, which to me is poetry. It sort of takes back to the time we started. It is now nearly 30 years since, in a BBC room in London, on an old BBC typewriter and on smooth, non-Russell BBC script paper, I wrote the first sentence of my first publishable book. So would you please take us back to that time in, I guess it was the Langham Hotel where BBC was situated, and how it all started?
Yes. Well, I have to go back a little bit.
Sure.
And the way I want to go back might be familiar to many people in this audience. I wanted to be a writer, I suppose because of my father. But then, to be a writer, you have to have something to write about. And what happened was that I discovered very early in myself that I had nothing to write about. So one had to do something about that. And my beginning was simply to try to find out what I had to write about. Because there was all the anxiety about what I was going to do and everything else, what was going to happen to me when I came out into the world. I had to work out all of that. And I will say that to ask this question now is for me to forget all of that horrible anxiety of being a writer, of having something to write about. It was a great trial, you know. When I did succeed in doing something, but it was very disturbing.
Right.
It was very disturbing. And I have found many people who wish to be writers who have the same kind of anxiety. They don't want to write anything. They have nothing to write about. They just want to be this lovely thing called a writer. And this is true of me, certainly.
I think it's true for most of us, if not all of us.
What?
I think it's true for most of us who wish to be writers. We like to be writers, but we don't have
idea
Exactly.
of being a writer.
So.
Exactly.
But then you wrote Miguel Street, but it wasn't your first published book.
No.
What was the story behind that?
Well, I came down from Oxford. So I left Oxford and hung around London for a bit. And then this thing about not having anything to write about rather worked on me, and I became very irritated with myself. And I decided that I had to do something about it. I had to begin to write. It's a difficult thing to do because the essence of being a writer is that you have all this anxiety, you have all this work to do, and you cannot play the fool with idleness. So I began dealing with this idleness, and then one day in the BBC, I'll tell you something about the BBC in those days. We had a room, the freelancers' room, on the second floor of the Langham Hotel, which was part of the broadcasting. So rather like kind of blind man, I thought I would do something. And what I did one day in that BBC freelancer's room, I began to write something. I didn't know what I was writing or where it was going to take me, but I began to write something. And what I did was a bit of magic with myself. I said, I will not leave this room until I know where this writing is taking me. So I will not leave this room until I know what I'm writing. So that was how it began. It began in this strange way, strange because it sprang from nothing.
Right.
But what there was behind all of this, I said I didn't know what to write about. All that is true. But the trouble is that at that stage, my life was piling up behind me. And so I was discovering material that was going to be useful to me later. So I had a lot of things to write about.
Yes.
Without knowing what I was going to do. And so that afternoon in the BBC, when I said to myself, I will not get up from the table and this typewriter until I know what I'm doing. And I actually did feel that.
And that was the beginning of Miguel Street.
That was the beginning of that,
which
yes.
you sent to the publisher Under Deutsch.
Yes.
But he persuaded you to work on a novel, and you wrote The Mystic Monsieur.
How easy you make it sound.
Yeah, true. How easy.
It wasn't as easy as that. It was full of anxiety and worry and kind of madness, really. Madness because if you wanted to be a writer and you had nothing to write about, how could you tell people, I'm coming down from Oxford, I'm leaving Oxford, I'm going to go to London and be a writer. What are you going to write about? And you have to say, I don't know yet. It will come to me later. Yes. So, bizarre. But that was the way it was done for me. That was the way it happened.
And in your earlier books, there's a lot of comedy, there's a lot of farce. You had a lot of comic characters in Miguel Street, Mystic Monsieur.
Yes.
And this is from your sort of childhood days in Trinidad, all the characters you saw.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
And then you came onto a much bigger book, A House for Mr. Biswas. And,
Yes.
and that was a grand novel.
That's a big book.
Big
yes.
book. Could you
Yes.
please tell us how it's all sort of started or where you got the inspiration from? Anything you remember from your writing experience? Because I know you were working under very stressful and very hard conditions.
Say some of that again.
I was saying that House for Mr. Biswas,
Yes.
when you're writing it, it's such a big novel.
It's
You
a
had-
big book, yes.
And you had to work very hard, and the working conditions were not very good. You were living in such squalid conditions, and you still worked through it. And the book, for me at least, is a perfect meditation. Every line is perfect. Every sentence is just right.
Yes.
So how did you sort of get inspiration for that, or where you found the material for that?
Well, again, you see, what happened with that thing about the beginning of Miguel Street, I thought this was my subject. I had to do that. But that just came to me one afternoon, that this is what I should write about. A bit of luck, you know? And this other book you're talking about, The House, that came in that way too. I thought I should do something like that. Something, my father's memories and father's life. I should use a bit of that. So what I'm trying to tell you is that it's all very chaotic. It's all just happening, and no one knows where you're going, least of all the writer. He just is, as it were, killing time, wasting his life. And then, miraculously, the books began to come. From this early attempt to write, where I knew nothing about where I was going, I arrived at the stage where I knew where I was going and began to write real books.
And after 4 books of fiction, you turned to nonfiction.
Yes, yes.
The Middle Passage. That was your 5th book.
Yes.
A book of nonfiction.
That was a long time afterwards, yes.
And how did it come about? You were impulsed by the Trinidadian Prime Minister? You had a meeting with the Prime Minister of Trinidad, and he asked you to write about something? Do you remember that?
Who was this?
The Prime Minister of Trinidad?
Eric Williams.
Eric Williams?
Yes.
On the Middle Passage. No, but before he finishes the Biswas story, he did House for Mr Biswas. He was very young, and he wrote it and left the manuscript on the kitchen table and went for a cheap holiday to Venice. He had the worst holiday of his life. He kept thinking, oh my God, if there's a fire, because there were no copies.
And of course, back in the day, there's no computer, no backup.
There was nothing. Yeah.
Well, that was a real
Calamity.
dread, you know, the real dread. So you've, of the audience here, found it amusing, but it wasn't for the writer. It was you know what happened? I wrote a draft. I was writing in Kilburn, where I had a flat, and it all piled up, the paper,
On the kitchen.
many inches high at the end of that book, you know. And
You went to Venice.
I think that came later. I
Yeah,
think
that
that
was the
came
book.
later. It's no, you see, one's life is so disorderly. We can't say I did this and then I wanted to do that, and then it goes on like that. No, it doesn't. It's a bit of a mess. A bit. And my life was a bit of a mess for a long, long time.
And I'm just going to share with the audience a side note that many of my Bangladeshi friends may not know. That is the James Bond's theme tune that you hear, the 007, the opening sort of music you hear, which is universally popular, it actually comes from A House for Mr Biswas. So maybe you don't know this. Monty Norman, who was a composer who's still alive, he's 88 years old, he was given the task of composing a tune because The House for Mr. Biswas, which was a big hit in 1961, was going to be a stage production in London. It didn't happen because they could not find enough black actors in London at the time.
Indians.
Or Indians. So the theme tune which he composed for A House for Mr. Biswas, which he was inspired by reading the book and taking songs from the book, that was left unused. And then came sort of the Broccoli Productions, who asked him to do a theme tune for Dr. No, the first James Bond, as you all know. And he played it to them, and they liked it, and hence it was taken by James Bond.
Again, our son makes it all sound very jolly.
That's my job. That's my job.
It wasn't like that at all. It was full of terror. I remember one day, you see, I'd begun to write something very foolish and trivial. And there was a critic. I had this little job in the BBC, and so I could call these people to take part in the program. And one man who came was a man called Arthur Calder Marshall, and quite a writer of the 30s. And so I asked him whether he would look at what I had been writing. A very foolish thing to do. Because if you're writing badly, and you know you're writing badly, no amount of excitement and encouragement will make it better writing, you know?
True.
And what did he say when he saw your work?
Well, what he did, he broke my heart. He replied very promptly to my letter and to the manuscript I had sent him, and he said, I think you should abandon this book immediately.
Abandon the book.
Yes,
I see.
he said that. And of course, he was right, because what I was doing was nonsense, you know? Like many people who wish to be writers, they do a lot of nonsense.
Yeah, that's true.
So I did.
Mostly, yes.
My letters said, yes. And I remember how bad it was for me, sitting in a bus and with the words of Arthur Calder Marshall ring in my head, I would abandon this book immediately.
And if I can go back to nonfiction, because you have this sort of beautiful way of looking at the world without any ideological baggage, and a very clear-eyed way of looking at everything, not being judgmental, but considering everything. How did you learn that? Because one thing we often forget is when Sir Vidia was doing this is he's a precursor to all of us in terms of any big writers you hear of today. I mean, when he started, there was no such thing as post-colonial literature. We have to understand this. This is the 50s in England. And he sort of started this trend, which we are now all borrowing from. We're all indebted that way, every one of us, at least the ones who are in the subcontinent, if not around the world. So this training, how did you have this way of looking at the world and writing with such clear-eyed precision?
Well, I don't know if I could tell you how my mind works, well, then of course I could write another book. But writing isn't like that. The anxieties that remain with one for a long, long time. And so I didn't really know. What I'm hoping is that, or not hoping, is that one day some critic will go to the place where my manuscripts are stored and see how the writing occurred. It'd be a very messy process, you know?
And you would interview a lot of people you would find interesting. You would interview them. And there was a technique you would often employ. Would you care to share with us, if you recall that, the technique of keeping one notebook in your breast pocket and one on the side, and you would allow them to talk, and then you would go back to them if you find them interesting enough, so they would tell you more in length?
No, nothing is as simple as that. Everything is rather messy and complicated and full of beginnings and ends and abandonings and full of things you can't reconstruct, you know? And you wanted to know how I got the people.
Yes.
Well, I can give you an idea of that. The idea was that when I began to write and then found myself writing something, I thought about the material. I thought about what had come to me, this way of looking. I speak of it like that, in this magical way, because it was a bit of a magic for me to arrive at a way of looking at my experience, thinking about it, and doing some work about it. So I was lucky that way. I was lucky that way.
And we're lucky to be reading you. We're lucky to have your books.
What?
We're lucky to have your books with us today. We read you, and we are lucky that way. Your luck has sort of come to us. I want to talk about your experience of Africa, because you spent a lot of time there, and it inspired you to write A Bend in the River, which changed the way we look at many things in the post-colonial world. Would you share with us your experience of Africa and how you came to the book?
Well, this is really getting quite deep into one's career, where one is writing with more conviction and confidence than in the beginning, which I mentioned, the early days, where one, never had it quite right. I wonder where I was going with that thought. I was going somewhere, but then I forgot it. And I think Ahsan might have to help me with this.
Yes, we were talking about the bend in the river.
A bend in the river, yes. That's quite a late work.
You were teaching at Makerere.
What?
You were teaching there at Makerere.
Makerere
You'd gone
University.
for a short sojourn to Makerere.
Yes.
Paul Theroux was also there. And that's when you started thinking about the bend.
I'm not sure now. I'm not sure.
But when we were in Africa now,
Yeah.
they said it was prophetic, the book, The Bend in the River. And they wanted to ask him, when he was writing The Mask of Africa, that how did he see it? How could he see it? The dead bodies coming down the river. And he said, it is awful when a writer can see what is going to happen. He has to look very carefully. But it is awful. Do you remember that?
Yes.
I just want to share with the audience a little side note. Sir Vidia had written 15 books both in fiction and non-fiction at the age of 45. So again, I just wanted to put it into context. At 45, I mean, I'm close to 40 now. I'm not so close. And I've written nothing, and I'm trying to be a writer. So 15 books at 45, and he had won all the major literary prizes, aside from the Nobel. All the major literary prizes he had won. But he was still not feeling anything but anxious. The financial difficulty was still there. I mean, again, try to put into context today, we expect big advances for our first manuscript, and how easy it can be relatively to those times, and the struggles Sir Vidia felt. So I just wanted to come back to your works in terms of, you've written fiction, non-fiction. By the time you're 45, you've written 15 books. You still had this constant need to go on and find new material, to discover new material.
Yes. Well, I have no trouble about that now.
Right.
Whereas when I was beginning to write, that seemed to be a great, great hill to climb, you know, where you get your material from. What kind of book would come to you? And then it always comes when at a certain stage in your life, the books that gave you trouble at a certain stage no longer give you any trouble. You have an idea that somehow all this is going to lead to a book, and that's how it works out.
I'll just talk to Lady Naipaul for a bit. Well, thank you for being with us in Dhaka and coming here and bringing Sir Vidia with you. So I just wanted to ask you, why did you agree to my plea to come to Dhaka?
Come to Dhaka?
Yes.
Okay, I'll be very honest. If I had not carried a little bit of Bengal in me, Vidya would never be in Dhaka. It is because my very happy years as a teenager were spent in Dhaka. I was 13 and 14. I was 13 going on to 14. And I loved it. It was part of me. You know, I used to go to the college here as a child. I used to run from school and run after Maulana Bhashani, who used to be shouting, and I would run behind and say, "Ayub Kutta." And they would complain and say she was running after Maulana Bhashani with the children. She would run out. And I was to be called, and they would say, "Why are you doing this?" And I would say, "Why not? He's protesting, and he's right." And so it was my love for Bengal. Bangladesh. I'm sorry for saying East. You know, some ties cannot be cut. Geopolitical realities change, politics change, everything changes. But some love cannot be, forgotten. So I loved Dhaka. I loved Bengalis. I loved Bengal. It was part of us. And I told Vidya, you must go. We must see it.
And what has your experience been so far of seeing Dhaka?
I recognize Dhaka Arts College, where I used to come every Sunday.
Charukala.
But I didn't recognize anything else. And I have such memories of the bullfrogs, big bullfrogs, the croaking through the night, the rain that came down where you couldn't see through. And, well, I don't know, maybe things change. But your love hasn't changed. You're still wonderful people. I'm just sorry that you get such bad press. If only people could see this, they would be dazzled. Don't you think so? They're wonderful people.
Yes, yes.
So that's what brought Vidya here. My Bengal, the little bit of Bengal that I carry in my heart. So.
And the other question I had, I'll start with Sir Vidia on this. I just want to ask you about Augustus, because he was very important in your life. Augustus was Sir Vidia's cat. So, could you just tell the audience about Augustus? They need to know about Augustus.
I didn't get the question, They
want to know about Gussie, about Augustus. your cat
Oh,
and your great love for him. He was the only thing that could stop him from working. Nobody else. He used to say, even if somebody dies, don't tell me if I'm writing a book. It can wait. But they were the only creature. He used to lie on Vidia's table when he was writing Beyond Belief, and he wouldn't move. And every time Vidya picked up the pen, the cat would do this. And then he would just sit. And then I walked in after 2 hours and I said, how much have you done? And he said, nothing. He won't let me work. So we were completely hostage to this cat. He was. I think he learned, he has a great love for animals. You can tell them something, yeah?
Yeah.
Tell them something about
Something about
Gussie.
Augustus.
You named him Augustus because you said, now my house is no longer a republic. Isn't that true?
that's a bit of luck calling him that. But it came to me because precisely I was reading a lot of Roman history at the time, and so this idea of a republic came to me.
Oh, it's all right. It's okay.
Lady Naipaul, would you care to share at least one story about Augustus that you shared with me? For example, either the Evening Standard one or the furniture story, the furniture that Augustus did.
Oh, God, yes.
Either of them, the audience would really
With
appreciate.
the cat.
Yes.
Yes. You mean this furniture that came from Beaumont Fletcher for
Our
him?
friends need to understand the importance of Augustus in Sir Vidia's life.
I think it's because I think Vidya's life has been work, 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 work. He's worked. He always said that we need 3 lives. 1 life to work, 1 life to experience, and 1 life to live. But because he's worked so hard, there were a lot of rough edges to him, I'll be honest. And I used to keep thinking, how do I tame this roughness? It was to give him a kitten. And you know, when you get a little kitten which is helpless, you learn to love. I think that is what changed his life completely. It was his. It was needy. It wanted love. It used to sit in his pocket. He used to walk around all day with Augustus in his pocket. But little did I realize that I was bringing a rod for my own back. Because suddenly, we had the architect in, we had a room made for Augustus, we had a big plasma TV brought for Augustus, we had the most expensive, ludicrously expensive sofa with 2 chairs brought from Beaumont Fletcher from Augustus, and Augustus destroyed it, you know. He clawed it and he looked at it and he said, I'm sure they've been cruel to animals. There's some cruelty to animals. Send it to the upholsterer. And when, of course, it came back and Augustus had taken out all his, angst, he didn't touch it. He said, see, I told you, that material probably was smelling of some cruelty. That's why Augustus destroyed it. So then we had a cat sitter, 2 cat sitters. They had to keep a diary. Augustus went out. He came in at 10:20. He had a mouse in his mouth. We brushed him. As you said, 100 brushes. And then he told the cat sitters, fine, you can write this diary, but I think I'm going to put in cameras. That's when they came and said, no, please, we can't deal with this. It's obsessional. That's how to persuade him not to put cameras on the cat sitters. Augustus was lost for a month. The cat sitter lost him. This is a big, burly Englishman, a builder. He became so thin, his wife said, in the month that you were away, no diet could work. He lost his appetite. He kept telling his wife, I've lost the damned cat. And then he saw Augustus whiz past in 3 weeks, and he got on the jeep and caught him and brought him back, and he was locked in for the whole month we were away in Japan. And he said, I'm sorry, I can't let him out. I can't go through that anxiety of losing the cat. So he had a great love, and I think it developed into a kind of softness, It softened him towards many other things. Is that okay?
Thank you. Sir Vidia, we once discussed your books on India, the three great books that you've written, the three nonfiction. And you once told me that people think of it as the three stages of a country, but it's actually the three stages of a writer. Do you recall that?
Say that again.
The three books of India you wrote,
Yes.
and I once asked you about that, and you said people think of it as three stages of a country, but it actually is the three stages of a writer.
Very good point. Yes, yes, yes. That is true. That is true. Yes, yes, yes. Yes. It's as simple as that. You think you're writing about a country. In fact, you're writing about yourself. You're writing about the changes in yourself over a few years. You can't help it. And so this is, I'm afraid this is one of the things that you can't explain in writing. You know, you have to just look at it and read it and see what you come by. Yes. Yes.
I think that's a great piece of advice you just shared with the audience here.
Yes.
We have come quite close to the end of the occasion. I would like to open the floor for questions now. We have about, actually less than 10 minutes.
You describe writing as something which is agonizing, as stressful, and it's kind of that excites terror. Can you hear me?
You'll have to help me with this.
I'll help you.
I can't follow his
No,
his
let him
speech.
finish the question.
Okay. My question is that you described writing, the process of writing, as something which excites terror, which is messy, and which is difficult to do. But the question that I want to ask you that what still encouraged you to keep on with writing? That would be really great to know from you, given the fact that it was very difficult to do for you, and you have said that all through your writing career, it was something which persisted, the terror and the messiness and the difficulties. But what kept you going? Thank you.
He said, despite the difficulty, despite the thing that you say, how difficult it was to be a writer, what kept you going?
Well, it will sound very vague to say, but if I hadn't kept on trying to write, I'd have had nothing to do, and it would have been too awful.
True. You'd be a hopeless carpenter and a very bad doctor.
You like cricket, and you thought you could be a cricketer?
No, his hands are too small.
But you couldn't because...
He couldn't be a cricketer. But you must tell them that when you went to Oxford, whatever you learnt in Oxford, it took you 10 years to unlearn it.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes, that is part of his writing. He actually taught himself how to write simply. And that is something that he shared with a great Indian art historian, Toby Falk.
Yes.
Both of you said the same thing. Even Toby said that I went to Oxford, but then it took me 10 years to unlearn all that, to be original. And Vidya had great sympathy with him. And Vidya said, yes, when I went to Oxford, it took me a long time to cut all that out and start to write again, to find my tone, my voice. Wasn't that so?
Yes, yes, yes.
Oxford was a waste of time then.
Did Toby die in my time?
Yes, Toby is dead. Toby died. But Toby Falk said the same thing, and he didn't want his daughter to go to Oxford. He said, I don't want her to go there. She must remain original. She must have an original mind. But I had to stop him. He used to say, his tutor has just died. His tutor was 93, and his name was Peter Bailey. And Peter Bailey used to call me up and say, Nadira, the Daily Mail's rung me up again, and they said, Vidya says close down Oxford. And they say, what should I say? And I said, well, what did you say, Peter? And he said, well, I said, maybe Vidya says that because we gave him a second in English. Then I had to tell him, stop it. As long as Peter is alive, you will not say anything like this. It hurts Peter. Peter, you know, it was his core best student, you know, student who had made it. Well, it was a lovely audience, I must say. You want to go? I'm so happy to be here. We are so happy to be here. Thank you very much.
I'll take one last question.
So Vidya, what gives you pleasure now?
Great question.
Lovely, lovely question. What gives you pleasure now? He'll think about it. He'll think about it.
Yes, I have to think about it.
And Sir Vidia will get back to you. On that note, we will close the floor now. And thank you so much for coming. We'll actually stand up.
Thank you.
Everyone is very happy.
Thank you. Thank you.